Funding for New Mexico in Focus provided by the McCune Charitable Foundation. And viewers like you.
This week on New Mexico in Focus, the local face leading President Biden's policy plans and coordination with tribal nations.
Working with Indian country and giving Indian country a seat at the table is important to him, and he's made that clear to his entire cabinet.
Plus, the governor's plan to open New Mexico by July. New Mexico in Focus starts now. Thanks for joining us this week. I'm your host, Gene Grant. The COVID response plan has been big news this week. Now that we've had a couple days to digest it, the line looks at the implications. Our opinion panel also looks at census numbers showing New Mexico is losing parts of its population base, and a disturbing report from Searchlight New Mexico about a state agency that's using technology to sidestep the public eye. In the wake of the Derek Chauvin trial, we've assembled a panel of civil rights attorneys to talk about its impact on New Mexico and the significance of the New Mexico Civil Rights Act. We begin with the line. A couple of weeks ago, I closed out the show talking about a concerning population survey by a moving company. It showed New Mexico was losing its young population even as it gained residents over 65. Now, this week's census data and a legislative report bore out those survey findings. They come with all sorts of implications. So here to help us sort them is our Line Opinion panel. Joining us this week is Line regular and former state senator Dee Dee Feldman. Attorney and public safety expert Ed Perea returns. Good to see you, Ed. And Capitol Bureau Chief for the Albuquerque Journal, Dan Boyd, is back for another round. Now, the Legislative Finance Committee report says that state government would be wise to rethink how it delivers services, Dan. And in practical terms, what does that mean?
I think that means there's going to be some really tough political decisions on the horizon, especially when it comes to things like, do you consolidate schools? Do you eliminate certain colleges and universities? I mean, and obviously folks are going to fight for those in their districts. So I think that's going to be some painful decisions in the future. Obviously, we don't know for sure how the population will evolve, but at least based on those trends you report, currently we've had very modest growth over the last decade, but it looks, if it continues, like it'll actually start to decline New Mexico's population, which is a daunting, prospect, and especially given the state's looks like it's going to get older and older, and the birth rate's going to decline.
Mm-hmm. Those 3 or 4 things just mentioned add up to a big problem, because we're looking at a 2.83% growth rate over the past decade compared to the rest of the country, or the rest of even the region. How can we do this? How can we pull this off with declining birth rates and over 65 population booming? How does this go forward in a poor state like New Mexico?
Well, I think Dan has pinpointed where some of the political decisions have to be made, given our declining enrollment and also our growing senior population. The senior population consumes more resources. They also spend more money. So in that way, there may be some opportunities there. But some of these trends we've known about for a long time. There's been declining enrollment.
Yep.
We know that there has been a growth in the seniors. What is the big hit is those people in the middle brackets, the working age people, the young families, as you pinpointed in your commentary. They have been victims of the 2008 recession, and many have left the state for jobs. And also there's changing lifestyles. I mean, people are not buying homes.
Right.
People are not having children.
Yep.
When they are in their childbearing years. So that all bears decisions. But I think there's one thing that we haven't talked about. Okay, we have a 2% growth rate, and that is like causing everyone to sound the alarm. But, there used to be a time when people questioned whether continual growth was a good thing for our environment, a good thing for our economy, and asked, shouldn't we be figuring out how we can come up with a steady state growth, a sustainable kind of growth that still creates jobs but doesn't destroy everything in its path.
Was there a number, Didi, attached to that in your time in the Senate? Had someone determined what that proper percentage of growth was?
No,
Okay.
no, that's a philosophical difference.
Okay.
A lot of people feel that our society must grow very rapidly in order to maintain our standard of living. We have a very high standard of living. We consume a lot of resources. And so, part of that is problematic when it comes to climate change and consumption of resources, decline in species sometimes as a result of human activity.
Only takes a couple of
growth.
degrees. That's right, just a couple of degrees, and nature responds. Hey, Ed, I got to tell you, this was a huge talker on social media for us on Twitter. Let me read you a couple things. Evelina V, just for her last name, said education is a big hurdle. She also listed a number of areas the state should invest, including broadband education. Also was a big one for Brian Wade Boo, who told us it wasn't necessarily the reason he moved his family out of the state, but poor schools are keeping him from coming back to the state. And one last one, a fellow named Jerry Everhart pointed out education as well, in particular coupling it with business in the community to form training partnerships, and also targeting programs to high-need job areas like teachers, of course. There's a lot to chew on there, but what grabs you among those comments? Is there a similarity you're hearing?
Whether we're talking about growth or just maintain the population status quo, education is critically important. There's no question about it. If we talk growth, it's incredibly important to be attractive to people, other people who want to move into our state. As the person on Twitter mentioned, he might not move back for those reasons. On the other hand, if you're seeking the sort of that steady state population, you want an educated workforce. I mean, right now we are looking at such a decline of the population under the age of 18. But for those who remain in the state, who are of school age, the quality of our education is important just to continue to move our state forward, technologically and leadership wise. I think, education is key also to quality leadership. So either way you want to look at this, education is a key component to moving forward.
Good points there. Dan, let me ask you about this. You're the demographic the state is after, if I could be so bold, the way you have your life set up. I mean, does this report in the census data ring with you with your concerns as a husband and a father and think about the future?
Yeah, it definitely it does. I mean, I've had a number of friends my age who have left New Mexico for jobs in Colorado or other states, and we've decided to stay and are fortunate to be able to do so and love New Mexico. But I think, what both Didi and Ed talked about. I mean, if there are not job opportunities for young professionals and not a good education system, I mean, I think a lot of families are going to look elsewhere, and I don't think that's a new revelation, but I think it's been hard for New Mexico to find those job opportunities, even to keep, its students in the state after they graduate, even if they do get a quality education, whether that's the film industry, now with the fledgling cannabis industry. I mean, maybe there's some signs of hope there on the horizon, but, not having that really strong kind of private sector like Denver or Austin or places like that, I think it's been hard to compete and hard to keep young folks here.
Didi, I got one quick one here. Just got a couple of minutes left. One of the things that was not stated in the LFC report, but sort of glaring in its obviousness, is losing folks at a very key age in their late 40s and early 50s are also leaving our state. That's a dilemma because these folks are at the height of their skills, at the height of their, you know what I mean? That's a dilemma, and replacing that skill set is going to be another challenge, isn't it?
Definitely. And I think that training programs and education, as others have stated, are important. But also, I think New Mexico needs to look to see the niches that it can fill, and the niches that it can fill from people perhaps leaving New Jersey, Connecticut, California, because the cost of living is so high, or the urban nature of those states presents a health hazard that nobody thought about.
But
before.
that didn't happen in 2020, did it? A lot of those folks just didn't come here at a time when there's a lot of swirl going around in the country. Why is that?
Well, I mean, we made no effort to attract them.
I think
we
you're
made
right.
no effort to attract them. Tourism is down, but now that people can work remotely, it seems to me that that's a marketing campaign that we have to start in order to attract that age group. And I think that age group is very environmentally conscious. And could be attracted to our great outdoors and our landscapes.
We need to figure out how. Absolutely. Out of time on that one. We're talking government transparency when we return, and later in the show, the coming changes to New Mexico's pandemic public health plan.
Policing is very much doable constitutionally. You don't have to commit crimes, and it doesn't put officers in danger to do it constitutionally. And so hopefully that's what they do going forward.
Tribes have a unique relationship with the federal government, which is obligated to fulfill Indian trust and treaty responsibilities. To that end, the Biden administration has vowed to uphold tribal sovereignty and to work to improve government-to-government relationships. Native Americans, including some with ties to New Mexico, have been named to key positions in the administration to further the tribal agenda. This week, NMIF correspondent Antonia Gonzalez talks with Pawe Rivera, President Biden's White House advisor on tribal affairs.
Pawe Rivera, welcome to New Mexico in Focus.
Thanks so much for having me.
Let's start off by sharing a little bit about what your role is.
Sure. Well, thanks so much. It's great to speak with so many New Mexicans today. I serve in the White House Office of Intergovernmental Affairs as a senior advisor and director of tribal affairs. So working closely with our tribal governments in the Office of Intergovernmental Affairs.
And a lot of people in New Mexico may be familiar with your father, who is served with the Pojoaque Pueblo for many years, including as governor, and many may know his art sculptures around New Mexico and even across the country. How did his leadership role in watching him, how did that impact your career path?
Well, certainly it was my dad was a great role model to have growing up and get the exposure to, the importance of our tribal governments in New Mexico and working closely with state, local, and federal partners on the issues that are facing tribal communities. And so getting to see that up close and to see the strides that our tribal communities have made over the years has played a great impact in my life, and the work that I'm able to do now is really informed by my previous experiences of having lived in the Pueblo Pojoaque, grown up, and living in northern New Mexico. So always appreciative and grateful for that background.
And as you know, there was much celebration across Indian country when Deb Haaland, our former Congresswoman here for New Mexico, became Secretary of the Interior, and now Brian Newland, another Native American, being nominated for Assistant Secretary for Indian Affairs. Why is representation of Native Americans important in the administration?
Well, I think it's incredibly important because people are policy, and having decision makers who come from the lived experiences and their backgrounds of coming from those communities and actually having a role in the policies that they're helping to shape is invaluable. And that's the leadership that the president values, and that's why he has selected Secretary Haaland to be a part of his cabinet, to become the first Native American cabinet member, because he values the perspectives of not only Native American peoples, but also bringing in someone like Secretary Haaland, who is incredibly experienced and incredibly qualified to lead the department and help to shape the administration's goals in the Department of Interior. So we're all incredibly proud of Secretary Haaland and of Brian, Assistant Secretary Newland, who was nominated, I believe, yesterday officially. So we're really looking forward to the way that our administration is shaping up, and really proud of what we've been able to accomplish over the 100 days coming up here in a few days.
And there are many, many issues important to tribes across the United States, from Alaska all the way across here, including in New Mexico. But COVID-19 continues and still is a priority for tribes. What is the administration doing right now to address recovery, funding, healthcare, anything dealing with even economic development, and dealing with COVID-19 recovery for American Indians and Alaska Natives?
Absolutely. No, COVID-19, the pandemic, has disproportionately impacted tribal communities across the country, and really, we've seen the devastating impact to not only vulnerable community members, but to many elders and people in our communities who bear our cultures and speak our languages. So, getting the pandemic under control in Indian country is the top priority, the top priority of the president's from day one. And, from day one, the president established the White House COVID response team, which takes a whole of government approach to addressing the pandemic, and ensuring that Indian country is a big part of that, especially in the American Rescue Plan, $31.2 billion going to Indian country, and part of that assistance going directly to COVID response. So last week we were pleased to announce $4 billion to fight the pandemic in Indian country, including funding tribal health systems, increasing vaccinations, and really making sure that we're providing the relief to our communities that have been hit hard.
And President Biden has committed to respecting tribal sovereignty and building relationships with tribes. Key members of the administration have already met with Native Americans. Secretary Haaland traveled to the Southwest and met with Pueblo leaders here in New Mexico. And the First Lady of the United States is currently on the Navajo Nation. The second gentleman has made various meetings, including with some Pueblo leaders here in New Mexico and other areas of the country. Talk a little bit about why that's happening.
Well, I think, from day one, the president has made clear that working with Indian country and giving Indian country a seat at the table is important to him, and has made that clear to his entire cabinet and his entire administration. I feel fortunate to be able to be a part of that, and having trips like the First Lady's to Navajo Nation, where she's spending, 2 days, meeting with tribal leaders, visiting vaccination sites, tribal schools, and having the second gentleman's trips to the Yakima Nation in Washington, and also to visit the Kewah Pueblo, to visit their health center there, I think really helps to inform our leaders, our principals, about the needs of Indian country, and that they're carrying the message of the administration to Indian country, but also showing the commitment of the administration to meet Indian country where they are, and to really make sure that tribal leaders have the opportunity to interact and engage with our top leaders and the leaders in the administration to fulfill the nation-to-nation relationship.
Pauwi Rivera, thank you so much for joining us here on New Mexico in Focus.
Thank you so much for having me, Antonia.
The Department of Children, Youth, and Families has one of the most important jobs in the state government, that of safeguarding vulnerable children and families. It comes with intense scrutiny, the kind that is often uncomfortable for top administrators. So more than a few eyebrows were raised this week when Searchlight New Mexico's Ed Williams reported the agency has been using the app Signal to encrypt communications during the pandemic. The agency has also admitted to deleting communications. Now, Republicans have seized upon this report, and Attorney General Hector Balderas is investigating. Indeed, much of what COAFD does is shielded by privacy for its clients. We all know that. But attorneys, Searchlight consultants say it's a chilling practice. Why does the agency, just first of all, why does the agency need to keep those messages?
Well, I don't really understand the agency's argument, so I'm probably not the one to ask on that. But I think that their argument is that, they're protecting sensitive case files, information about children that should not fall into the wrong hands. However, the problem is that these are public records, and they they need to, at minimum, be preserved. They might be encrypted, but there are two things here: the encryption and the destruction. The destruction of these automatically after the communication has been made is very problematic. I mean, even just in terms of keeping public records for the archive of history and the state library, it's not possible when they are destroyed automatically. So they indicated that this was a convenience to them because of COVID, but always as an open government advocate, we ought to ask what are they hiding? What is it they are hiding here? And some of it may be sensitive information, but remember, the information used by the public and reporters through IPRA requests is usually based in identifying some issue. It's not in revealing a personal case, but it's identifying a pattern of child abuse or foster care or grandparents' custody of children that are no longer in the custody of their parents. And that information, if it's hidden, really hinders policymaking.
Interesting points there. Wow. Dan Brian Blaylock, the COAFD secretary, says if they didn't delete messages and shred other communications, they'd run out of space. But I don't recall seeing that provision as an exemption in the state public records law, that they ran out of space and so it's okay to destroy things.
And I think that may be an issue, that technology is outpacing the open records laws. Now with so many people communicating via text, via Signal, or these other kind of apps, that I think that is a concern, like Dee Dee mentioned. And I think how the question of how widespread this is in state government is still unknown. I mean, clearly CYFD has been using it, but whether other agencies are using similar kind of apps or tools like that to communicate. On the one hand, I understand that the people are working remotely and need to be in touch with each other, but I agree that it's incredibly troubling, to have these records that are being automatically deleted and not have access to them for the public and for the media like us to review them and to look at them and use our best judgment on what might be newsworthy.
Sure, absolutely. Hey, Ed Perea, maintaining records, it's time consuming, undoubtedly requires either literal or virtual space, as we kid here. But do courts sympathize with this in your best judgment, or is it just a bad look?
I think it's highly problematic on the face of it, and I don't think it'll pass judicial muster. I think these are government agencies, and the government agencies and its employees answer to the taxpayers. And I think over the course of the past several decades, transparency has been on the top of the list of concerns, and really the expectation of the public. So I can see this going before the court, and there are a lot of issues involving transparency, especially when you look at the mission of this particular agency. CYFD, it's so critically important that there is full transparency and there has to be some level of oversight. I understand the arguments. I don't believe at this point, based upon what I'm seeing and reading, that these arguments are going to hold up in court. I think transparency is ultimately going to rule the day, just because the public has a right to know what its government agencies are doing. So it's more to come, but I don't expect the courts to uphold this sort of communication that's taking place with CYFD. But of course, more to come.
Ed, I got a question. Is there a reasonable middle here? I mean, is there a point where you don't have to keep records after a certain amount of time? I wonder if there's another situation on the state agency that they might be able to follow. Say, like if they were 3 years old, 10 years old, is there a reasonable time to get rid of some of these things if issues of, keeping these around are an issue? Is that reasonable?
Well, there's always the exceptions, right? And it depends on the issue. In court cases, some of these court cases can go on for decades. So, and especially when it involves children and again, the mission of CYFD, I would think that the court would expect these records to be held on to for an indefinite period of time. If that means 30 or 40 years, maybe it does. But I think when we're talking short term, I don't think that serves the interest of this of transparency is ultimately what I think the taxpayers and its citizens are expecting from its government agencies.
Yeah. Dee Dee, we've got about a minute here, but I mentioned Republicans have seized on this. They were awfully quiet, however, when Susana Martinez used private email to conduct public business. This kind of thing does happen because New Mexico's transparency laws are toothless. Is that why? Or is this just everyone decides on their own to freelance these things?
Everyone decides on their own to freelance. I think that's a good. Summary of it. And of course, the Republicans are seizing on this as a political issue. The Democrats are seizing on this as a political issue in the prior administration. The Attorney General should be investigating this. And our watchdog groups, New Mexico Ethics Watch, FOG, and others should be really monitoring this because this is important for the public. It seems like a sort of arcane issue, but it really goes to the public's right to know what is being done in its name. And in this case, to children by the government.
Yep.
And I think that's pretty important.
Good point there. Hey, Dan, real quick, Governor Lujan Grisham hasn't commented on this. Can she avoid it, or might this be the kind of story that only gets a little bit worse the longer it's ignored?
Yeah, I think that there will be questions to her about whether other agencies are also doing this. We'll see, obviously, what the AG or some of the other groups kind of come up with and what those investigations lead to. But I think this could be the kind of thing that has some legs. And I think it does kind of bring into question public trust in government, and how much of it is happening behind closed doors or where people can't access.
Well, if we're just talking dumping texts and things like that, I mean, I don't know, I could get 2 terabytes worth of information on a little plug-in C clip, so we'll have to see how that goes. We'll keep an eye on this for sure, but we're out of time, though. A closer look at the new COVID response when this group comes back.
There's so many variables for the scientists to look at. I mean, because children under 16 are not being vaccinated. So, and then of course there are the new variants as well, as Ed mentioned. So it's a complex thing, but I think the important thing is that we are very much headed in the right direction.
When a Minneapolis jury convicted former police officer Derek Chauvin of killing George Floyd, and when the city paid Floyd's family millions in a civil settlement, it seemed to put a bow on a dark chapter of justice. But few such cases against police officers accused of crimes and civil rights violations end up this way. In New Mexico, the Floyd murder formed a basis for a new law that changes how police officers can be held accountable for crimes committed on the job. NMIF senior producer Matt Grubbs spoke with 4 leading civil rights attorneys this week about how the Chauvin verdict informs justice here in New Mexico.
The death of George Floyd forced a national conversation about the use of force by police. That conversation is one New Mexico has been having for quite some time, though. Law enforcement here shoots people dead at rates often higher than anywhere else in the nation. Accountability for those shootings often happens not in a criminal trial or oversight hearing, but in a civil case. We are joined by a virtual all-star panel of local civil rights attorneys, Frances Carpenter, Carolyn Nichols, and Laura Schauer-Ives. Thanks so much for joining us. I'll get right to the first question. For New Mexico, is the real impact of what happened in Minneapolis George Floyd's death or Derek Chauvin's conviction? Frances, do you want to start?
I think it was both. I think the conviction was so cathartic for so many, and I think that it was powerful. I think his death caused a tide of events to occur. But those events, as those of us on the panel know, we've been fighting for years. And so I think it was both.
Sure. Cami, how do you see it? Does the conviction send a message that the death didn't already?
Yes, I hope it empowers other jurisdictions to take similar action if they're faced with something this egregious. I mean, clearly this was I mean, anybody that didn't think this was a murder, probably didn't watch the video. I mean, it was just appalling. And the fact that we can capture that type of thing now on, it's so easy for people to actually capture that on video. I hope that in the future, when prosecutors review these cases, that they take seriously their obligations to treat police officers as, any other human being in a circumstance where they've taken a life, and decide whether justice demands that they take that person to trial and charge them criminally. And they did a really excellent job in this case. I was impressed with the prosecution. I was terrified that there wouldn't be a conviction and what that would mean for our country if there wasn't, because they did do an excellent job. They clearly took this seriously, and they were out for justice, and they ended up getting justice, I think.
Laura, that exposure, kind of the live coverage of the trial itself, wall-to-wall coverage on media networks, what does the conviction and that kind of exposure signal to either, as Cami said, agencies or perhaps potential jurors who see this sort of thing?
I think it should signal to everybody that officers are no longer above the law. And they have been, for a variety of reasons, felt emboldened. And that has been the lack of criminal convictions, the lack of prosecution, the lack of accountability as a result of qualified immunity. And to have this and to have the change that we've seen and the change in public perception that we've seen over such a short period of time and such a massive change, policing is very much doable constitutionally. You don't have to commit crimes, and it doesn't put officers in danger to do it constitutionally. And so hopefully that's what they do going forward.
And I want to get into that here in a couple minutes. Let's talk first about qualified immunity in the New Mexico Civil Rights Act. It was born out of George Floyd's death. That's when we first started discussing it last summer. It allows civil rights suits in state courts and prohibits the qualified immunity defense, which is not really a law, but a legal doctrine, and it's protected police officers and some other public officials. Does one of you want to jump in on why that change is important, why the elimination of qualified immunity is important?
It's imperative. So again, it's allowed officers to not be held accountable. It's allowed them to act above the law. And it's the basic doctrine is that unless there is a case on point or something that looks identical that's happened in the past, an officer won't be held accountable by the courts, even if the court thinks what they did was unconstitutional. And so it allowed officers to behave in a manner that everybody was agreed was unconstitutionally, yet they wouldn't be held accountable in the civil system. And in New Mexico, to have really a genuine right of action under the New Mexico Constitution is a massively significant change. We have different constitutional protections that are going to impact policing in this state. So one, I think, really fantastic example is under the New Mexico Constitution, pretextual stops are not allowed. And so like when you hear about the case of somebody stopped for an air freshener or, and New Mexico has recognized in its jurisprudence that pretextual stops are kind of usually always often used to racially profile. And so that now there is a right of action and that can actually be litigated on behalf of somebody, that too will change policing. And it will change it instead of having to go back and up and down through an appeal, it'll be a lot faster because there's no qualified immunity. It is a big deal.
Cami, how is that different from pursuing a civil rights action in federal court?
So it's different in the sense that this is going to allow people to bring cases that otherwise would have been very difficult to bring because, as I'm sure all of these attorneys can attest, it's difficult to make a living practicing civil rights law. Your ordinary case, the original intent of the federal civil rights law was to encourage people to enforce civil rights, even though doing so meant you were putting your self and your client at great risk of no recovery. And then even if you recover, for a civil right violation, if it's not so egregious that somebody has died or, there's suffered some serious harm, you often have cases where the damages aren't incredibly high. They're not a lot in terms of compensation, but they're important. The idea was that enforcing civil rights is important and is going to lead to a better, more just society. So attorneys can then seek attorney's fees for prosecuting somebody's civil rights civilly, and taking cases that aren't huge damages cases. These aren't, fiery semi-truck accident cases. These are difficult cases to take and to win. And then even then, not always high damages cases. So I'm hoping that this will encourage people to take smaller cases, quote unquote, in the state of New Mexico to really enforce the Bill of Rights for New Mexicans and to know that they can, hopefully, at least if they're victorious, get their attorney's fees at the end of the day. And that's a huge difference when Frances or Laura or I all started practicing law, and we're running the risk in federal court of getting thrown out on qualified immunity because we didn't have an exact fact pattern, and then never recovering any attorney's fees, never being able to get justice for our clients. And it was, it's become very difficult to get a case all the way through federal court. And I'm hoping that this is going to make the path to enforce New Mexican civil rights much more something that more people feel that they can risk taking on.
Frances, how does that, I think you were going to jump in there anyway, but how does that $2 million cap on awards impact things?
I mean, listen, concessions had to be made. I mean, at the end of the day, what was important is that there's public interest in giving force to the laws that we already have. Okay, we've had a constitution in New Mexico, now for over 100 years. Why don't we have a right of action with regard to that constitution? Okay, now House Bill 4 applies to the Bill of Rights, but still, I mean, when you look at legislation, that's what's having to happen now because of qualified immunity. There's a public interest, and the public has spoken. I mean, the public said, we've had these rights, but we have no private right of action to bring forward and get justice for the violation of these rights. And that's what House Bill 4 does. There had to be some concessions made. All of us that are on this call worked hard in making concessions, giving and taking. That's the business of legislation. And at the end of the day, I'm not happy about a cap. I don't think there should be a cap. But I think that it was a fair concession, and I think it was something that needed to be made at the end of the day. But I want to just chime in on something that both Laura and Cammie made a point to mention, and that's that qualified immunity is an affirmative defense. And when 1983 the Civil Rights Act was originally put in place, it was to vindicate those violations of constitutional rights. The federal Constitution is a floor. It's the floor. The state constitutions, State versus Gomez, the New Mexico case, says that states can confer more rights. A lot of citizens don't even know that. But what was shocking to me is when I was speaking to people about House Bill 4, they couldn't believe that we didn't even have, this was the first time, here is 2021, and we have a Civil Rights Act for the first time. That's mind-blowing to me, but that's what's going to happen going forward when communities are speaking out now. And they're speaking out with legislation. And this, as I said earlier, this is, George Floyd's death created an amazing wave that can't be ignored. And that wave are the voices of these people that for years were shot down by qualified immunity, which was never the intention of this law. And so that's what's going to keep happening if, across the country. And I think we see that now this is the public speaking.
Sure. Laura, cities and counties were pretty vocal about the potential cost of this. Frances mentioned that it was a compromise to get this cap in there. You pointed out, I think it was on social media, that there's a cost on the other side, a cost to not having a clear path to accountability. Can you explain that?
Those costs are many. I mean, the costs are in delay. First of all, a municipality or the state is in the process of defending the case, defending the indefensible, ultimately. There's a cost in training. because training, law enforcement teaches to the cases and not necessarily to the best practices under the Constitution. There's a cost to us as taxpayers because defense attorneys are being paid lots of money to file these motions that could actually go to people who have been harmed. And there is just the psychological cost to our society that anybody thinks that any of this is possibly acceptable. And the cost on the other, the county's complaint, the Association of Counties, the Municipal League, State Risk, it costs absolutely nothing if they don't violate the Constitution. And that's what they need to do. They need to take steps to ensure the officers who are problematic and are no longer officers, and they need to train well. And we also just need to rethink what we are focusing our efforts on in terms of what we've criminalized would help as well. But there's a lot of work to do. But the county's complaints and the municipalities' complaints don't hold water. And I think we'll see that going forward. I think there will be fewer civil rights violations, in fact, because people are being held accountable.
Cami, on that accountability, Albuquerque certainly is what a lot of people think about when it comes to police accountability because of the DOJ's findings in 2014. You told me once that civil rights lawsuits in New Mexico, at least, have sort of traditionally been the way that accountability happens. What's your read on that? Why is that the case?
Well, I think that it forces the community to take seriously what is happening in their police force. So even in a small town, maybe especially, we've had cases against smaller police forces, officers in Santa Fe, Espanola, various smaller towns in northern New Mexico, southern New Mexico. And in an environment like that, I think it empowers the community to see that somebody can bring a cause of action to vindicate their rights. It causes discussion among community members about, the extent of what is lawful police behavior. When is somebody a victim of when have their rights been violated? And it creates the ability to have these kinds of debates in a real public forum. And then you see what happens. How does a jury decide? You're taking this to a jury. Often these cases, when Shannon Kennedy and I first started practicing law, we had to take every single case to trial because Mayor Martin Chavez was not settling any police abuse cases. And so we were in court a lot for the first 10 years of our practice and tried cases that ordinarily should have probably settled, but it created a forum for a jury to weigh in. And, we had a lot of success and there was a lot of community discussion around that. There was a lot of media about it. And I think that ironically, the decision not to settle cases actually brought a lot of police abuse to light and a lot of violation of civil rights to light that otherwise would never have had a public airing. So that's an important means of change, especially with these smaller cases that people might be able to afford to bring, given this new state law.
Frances, we just have about 45 seconds left here, but you mentioned sort of communities deciding to speak out on this. Is that something that you feel like grew out of Floyd and Chauvin and the conversation we've seen since that happened, coming up on almost a year ago?
I think that's part of it, but I think communities have been screaming for years. I think they've been speaking out for years. I think one of the most powerful things I saw was after the verdict was rendered, seeing all of these people finally, these voices scream, "We do matter." I wept when I heard that, and I got chill bumps because that is how. That says it all to me. Is that we matter, and. One thing I would say, Matt, is that the other thing that we need, I know we don't have a lot of time, is we've got to start working towards getting a federal standard for police training. The majority of police departments are small community police departments, not large departments. The police departments are allowed to create their own training, while these smaller departments go to other departments to try to get that training. we've got to get a standard. Okay, I just have to say that because I think it's in a combination with this legislation that the communities are pushing forward. We need to also start trying to push for a national standard.
Well, listen, we're out of time, but thank you all so much for taking time to talk about this with us. I know it'll be in the news inevitably again, but we look forward to discussing it with you more. Thanks.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Saying New Mexicans were, quote, conquering COVID, Governor Lujan Grisham announced the state could be 9 weeks away from reopening. That's theaters, restaurants, bars, the works. The bar the state needs to meet by then is 60% of the people eligible have been fully vaccinated. If that happens, she'll revise her public health order and lift capacity limits at businesses. Now, the state's red, yellow, green, turquoise system for county openings is also being revised to include vaccination levels. The key to all this seems to be vaccines, and according to this week's numbers, we're about 2/3 of the way to having 1 million people vaccinated. Ed, we saw the governor for the first time this week put a date positive on when we can get to something close to normal. What do you make of the reaction and the significance of her decision?
Yeah, Gene, I think this is a long time coming. I hear from local businessmen, especially small business owners, who are just elated by the news. They've been waiting so long for this type of news, and I think there's a lot of excitement. I think there's a lot of excitement amongst even the employees out there who are waiting to get back to work. I think we are seeking whatever that new norm is, and this gives us the opportunity to have some clarity as to what the future may look like. I know there's still some work to go. We need to reach that rate, that 60% mark is what the governor is shooting for by June, and by all indications, we're on track to make that happen. But I think all in all, it's a positive, across the board. Again, especially the core group that I have contact with, and those are small business owners who felt like they've been left out and have been impacted the most by this shutdown.
I'm hearing
so
the same.
Positive news.
Exactly right. Hey, on Ed's point, only Vermont, Massachusetts, and Connecticut have higher vaccination rates per 100,000 than New Mexico. So, Dee Dee, we're doing something well there. The governor and Dr. Scrace were clear that the 60% vaccination threshold was not herd immunity, however. Are people who are itching to get out going to be clear on that distinction? Because that term is just sort of floating out there for everyone's own individual interpretation.
Yeah, herd immunity is a different concept than 60% having been vaccinated, because herd immunity also takes into account the people that have had the disease and then have developed antibodies. So when you're looking to calculate herd immunity, which is a very amorphous thing, you have to not only look at the people who have been vaccinated, but the people that have had the disease. And that gives you some idea. Now, there's so many variables for the scientists to look at. I mean, because children under 16 are not being vaccinated. Mm-hmm. So, and then of course there are the new variants as well, as Ed mentioned. So it's a complex thing, but I think the important thing is that we are very much headed in the right direction. And if we keep our masks on when we're indoors, and if the Department of Health does a good job in reaching out to those people who might have some hesitancies in taking the vaccine or even their second dose of the vaccine, I think that we're really headed in the right direction, and we should be, as the governor was, very proud of our efforts here as we're like 400 or 440 days into this really horrific, historic period in our nation.
That's a good point there. Dan, Dr. Tracy Collins said on our show earlier this month that herd immunity isn't a guarantee with COVID-19, as Dee Dee was mentioning, especially when you talk about a population as large and diverse as an entire state. But given that, are we asking for trouble by throwing open our doors at the height of tourism season? Any concern of spread blunted by what would be a relatively high vaccination rate? Are we in balance here?
Yeah, I think there's concern that this herd immunity, it's a difficult number to quantify exactly where that might be. There's a lot of unknowns still about how often we might need to be vaccinated. Whether people who've recovered can be infected again.
That's right.
Things like that. But I think, like Ed was mentioning too, that there is this pent up demand for a little bit of a new normal and to get back out there, and certainly for businesses who have suffered, to be able to reopen and staff back up and hopefully enjoy these summer months that are coming up. But I think the governor's in a tough spot there. Kind of, either way, there's going to be some risk, and using this kind of vaccine as a carrot, this 60% threshold. I do think it's going to be harder to get to that. A lot of the folks who really wanted the vaccine have got it at this point. So I don't think getting to 60% will be a slam dunk necessarily, but certainly the state has been looking to reach out to different communities, work with primary care doctors and things like that to try to get over that threshold.
Glad you just mentioned that. You were part of that press pool, of course, on Wednesday for the governor, and I heard you ask your question too. But Dr. Collins made that point about reaching out to your primary care doc. She even mentioned friends that you trust. I mean, she sort of covered a lot of bases about how one can get comfortable with the idea of vaccinations, because we're just not going to get across the finish line unless we have more people participating. Are those? Do we need something more than that? A campaign, a paid campaign of some sort? What do we need to do here to get more folks to line up and get vaccinations?
I think some of that probably helps. I mean, I think a lot of folks have a relationship with their primary care physician or doctor, and maybe some trust there. I do think there's still probably some parts of the state, with Spanish language speaking populations that maybe haven't been getting the information that others in the state have been getting. So some more outreach targeted at them and using local groups on the ground to kind of, build trust in those communities. I think it's doable. I think New Mexico's effort has been, laudable in a lot of ways, but I think certainly there's also those who would say, why don't just open it right now? It's never going to be, doesn't seem like the virus is going to be totally going away anytime soon.
Mm-hmm. Ed, the way Dan just finished right there, I've heard that sentiment from so many people. And I want to ask you this under the idea of the state's, the mask mandate is going to stay in place for now. Indications will follow this, the CDC at this point. Now, will opening at the end of June swamp any mask momentum that's left? I mean, I know a lot of people, they just want to rip these things off at this point and just get on with it.
We talked a little earlier about the new normal, and I think maybe we need to start becoming comfortable with the new normal, and that new normal may include wearing a mask. Mm-hmm. And you look in other countries, and that is their norm. And I know often sometimes our way of thinking, we like our independence, and this mask may be cumbersome to some, but I think in the interest of overall society for the long term, we need to continue to do take those steps that are going to ensure that we continue to move on this positive track to minimize the infections out there. So, I think it's all about information and continue to spread the word that, the masks can be something positive to ensure that we don't slip back into where we were several months ago.
Dee, I can't help think about last summer and our, somewhat tourist season that we had in places like Red River and up north where there were a lot of Texans coming in. Masks were not part of the equation. Do you get my drift here? They just were not having it. And especially, I can't even imagine now trying to get tourists to wear masks while they're here. Does that even have a prayer?
I mean, there will always be people that will not wear masks. And there will always be people that will not be vaccinated. Mm-hmm. We have to chip around those edges. And I think that the Department of Health is doing a pretty good job by getting people to listen to trusted voices. And they have a campaign now called Trusted Voices. And they have, like Black archbishops, mm-hmm. EMTs. They have, it's a social media campaign. I think there's some TV advertising as well. I think Dr. Tracy Collins has got the right approach. She's asking people why they're not getting vaccinated. She's having their primary care doctors contact them and offer them the vaccine when they come in for something else, but basically to communicate with them. Because, why people are not getting vaccinated, why they're not wearing masks, everybody has their own reason. And as she said, one press release in English is not going to do it. You have to meet people where they are. And that's a sort of one by one retail process rather than, doing some sort of mandatory thing, which I think they've really tried to avoid at the state level. I mean, you could mandate tourists to be tested at the airport. You could mandate that they wear masks for any kind of recreation that they indulge in. But I mean, I don't think that's being contemplated.
Interesting stuff there. I'll have to do it for us. Thanks, as always, to our panel for their research this week and sharing their opinions. I'm back in a moment with a final few thoughts. The pandemic has forced us all to sacrifice a lot over the last year plus, but it has also given us a few pleasant surprises. For us here at New Mexico in Focus, that includes our New Mexico Local News Fund fellow, Bryce Dix. Now, Bryce started with us right as the stay-at-home order went into effect. And though we haven't been able to do much face-to-face work over the last year, Bryce has been integral to our coverage, both here on the show and our cannabis podcast, Growing Forward. We're sad to see him go, but excited about his next opportunity at KSFR Radio in Santa Fe. And in one of the themes of this week's show, we're also glad that New Mexico is keeping a talented journalist in our state. Best of luck, Bryce, and thanks for everything. Thanks again for joining us and for staying informed and engaged. We'll see you all again next week in Focus.
Funding for New Mexico in Focus provided by the McCune Charitable Foundation and viewers like you.